Hello everyone, I welcome you to my channel. This is the top I'm making today and this is what it looks like on me. In this first part, I'll be showing you the pattern making process of making this top, and in the next video, I'll be showing you how I'll be sewing it. This is the fabric I'm using for this tutorial. It's some leftover fabric I have, and this is my pattern. You can draft your pattern to the length of the top you are working with, but the one I have here is from the shoulder to the waistline. So let's go ahead to use this pattern to make our top. Because I'm working with a very stretchy fabric, I will not need this my sewing allowance. So I'll fold that in. Now I've folded in my sewing allowance, and that will help me to know the amount of fabric I'm going to be folding. So I folded the fabric that is enough for me to cut this top. But because this material is not so much, I'm going to be shortening the length of my top. Normally, the length of my top is 24 inches. But I'm going to take out 3 inches from that. So I'm left with 21 inches. So the total length of the top I'll be working with will be 21 inches. So from my shoulder to my waist is 16 inches. Then I'll put my tape rule there. This is 16 inches. Then I will move that up till when I get 21 inches. So this is going to be the length of my top. And then I'll go ahead and pin that. Now that we have gotten the length of our top done, we're going to work on the upper part of this top. Depending on the volume of the ruched effect or gathers you want around your upper bust area, that's what is going to determine how much excess you are going to add here. So for me, let's see if I can have about 10 inches from my shoulder line here. I think about 10 inches is fine. But for me, the upper part here, I can have up to 10 inches. So let me see if I can do 8 inches. Yes, I can do 8 inches. So from my neckline here, from the tip of my neckline here, I'm extending by 8 inches. So I have excess of 8 inches from here. So I'm going to mark a straight line of 8 inches. I'm going to draw out a line there. And from here, you're going to determine the width of your neck. It should be wider than your basic neck because your strap that is coming from the back is going to connect to it. So you need it to be a little bit far from your necklines for convenience sake. So for me, I think I'll use about 4.5 inches for the width of my neck. Depending on how wide you want your neck to be, you can go in 5 inches or whatever is convenient for you basically. And I'm going to add 0.5 for my sewing allowance. So altogether, I've marked inwards 5 inches. And from here, I'm going to connect it all the way down to my armhole. So to give you a sort of diagonal line. Can you see that? And with this, we're basically done. I'll just add my turning allowance here. So I'm going to be marking 0.5 above my new neckline, and that will serve as my sewing allowance, and I make a straight line there. And I can cut this out. I'm going to be marking, if if your top is up to your hip line, you just mark what your hip divided by 4 is going to be. But because mine is slightly above, my hip divided by 4 is supposed to be 9 inches, but I'll mark about 8.75. And then from my waist, I'm going to connect to that point and just redefine this place because it looks very sharp. And then I'm going to cut that out. Then I will need to do a little notch around this area because I'm going to be connecting my back at that point. So because the final result is going to mimic like an halter neck top, we're going to determine the amount of elastic we're going to be using for our top. So from the neckline here, I'm going to measure up to the armhole around here. So this leaves me at 10 inches. We're going to subtract about 3 inches from that because you need it to be as firm as possible. So when I'm cutting out my elastic, I'm going to be cutting an elastic that is 7 inches long, right? I'll show you when we get to that point because you need this area to be as firm as possible. And now that we have that, you're going to, whatever your own result is, you're going to note that somewhere. So my elastic length is going to be 7 inches. And I'm going to take this out and we're going to move on to the back. So for the back we're working with is going to end on the armhole line, right? So when I'm folding my fabric, I'm going to fold in this part of my pattern because we're not going to be needing it. But before I fold it, I'm going to measure, because I'm going to be adding strap to the back. So I'm going to measure from somewhere, maybe the midpoint of your neckline, or the neckline for my front is 4.5 inches, right? So from there, I'm going to mark my strap length. So from my shoulder to my armhole is 7.75 inches. So you're going to measure whatever yours is. So that means the length of my strap at the back is going to be 7.75 inches. So I'm going to also note that somewhere. Then afterwards, on my armhole line, I'm going to fold in my pattern like this because I'm not going to be needing the upper part. I'm replacing it with a strap. So I folded up to my armhole line. So this is what I'll be cutting out for my back. I'm going to be folding my fabric. You are going to be folding your back on fold too because we are not adding any zipper. So from my waist to the length of my top, for me was 5 inches. So I'm going to place my 5 inches here. This is my 5 inches. I'm going to move my pattern up to that point. So now I have achieved the length of my top. And then I can pin that down. I'm going to add 1 inch to be my folding allowance. So I'll fold in the back at the armhole area by 1 inch. And then I'm going to come here and mark if your top is as long as your hip line, you're going to mark your hip divided by 4. But for me, I took out 0.25 from the hip divided by 4 in the front for mine. So I'm going to come here and also mark the same thing. So mine is 8.75. So I've gone ahead to mark my 8.75. and I'm going to connect that. Oh, sorry. Because my material is stretchy, I don't need my sewing allowance like we did for the front. So I'm going to also fold in my sewing allowance. If not, the top will be extra big or the sewing allowance will be bulky, and we don't want that. So I can connect my waist to the length of my top. Remember, I used my hip divided by 4. I didn't add any sewing allowance to my hip line. And then I'm going to blend in to give me that waist curve, and I can cut this out. And that's basically it for the back. There isn't much to do at the back. So now I'll cut the facing for my back. Depending on the length of the facing you want, just fold, just place your back on it and cut it out. My facing looks like it's about 4 inches. Yeah, a little over 4 inches. And then I'll just cut that out. So this is what we have. So this is my back all done. Now I want to cut the strap for my back. So my strap is 7.75 inches long, but I'm going to add 1 inch for the joining allowance. So I want to ensure that I have a straight strap. So I'm going to mark a line here, and then I'm now going to mark 8.75 inches. So that's how long my strap will be plus the sewing allowance. And then you are going to determine how wide you want it to be. Remember, this is already on fold, so I want my strap to be about 2 inches wide, and then I'm going to be adding half an inch for the sewing allowance. That will leave me at 2.5 inches. Then I'm going to remember, this is on fold, so I'm going to be cutting 2 pieces of this. So I'm going to use this to cut another one. So I have 2 pieces for my back. What I'm also going to do now is to cut. Don't be like me, please. Please pin when you are cutting so that nothing moves out of place. So now we have all our pieces. Front is complete. The back is complete. Let me cut out my elastic. So I'm using this tiny elastic. I remember I marked, I remember I'm going to be using 7 inches for mine, right? So I'm going to be cutting two pieces of that because we're going to be using it on the right and the left side of my front. So this is going to be the elastic for the front.